Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. And strictly speaking, I still don't see you because monitors only go one way. And this is a recording. I grew up in a family that loves comics. We used to subscribe to 2 newspapers just so that we could read more comics. So when a friend of mine introduced me to webcomics, of course I fell in love instantly. I don't have to subscribe to anything to get them, and they're just plain better in every way. I get to read as many as I want, and I do read a lot of them. But I'm not here to explain all this to you. In fact, I'm going to assume that you already read a number of webcomics yourself.
A little while ago, I watched a video by a guy named Hadrix, which listed his top 10 favorite webcomics. And it wasn't just some boring list, but really a tribute to his favorite webcomics. I felt inspired. Not to mention he basically issues a challenge at the end.
Disagree with me? Or think I missed a great comic? Please comment or make response videos showing me what I've been missing all these years.
And so I've put together my own list/tribute video to my top 10 favorite webcomics. And so I bring you Marscaleb's top 10 webcomics as of the end of 2011.
Now, I really have problems with listing exactly what order my love for things comes in. I just hate playing favorites. I mean, I had a hard enough time just picking these 10 comics that I love above all others. I mean, I still got another 15 that I want to put in.
So, before we go anywhere, I want to stress that this is not presented in any particular order of how much I like a comic, how much I'd recommend it, how good it is, blah, blah, blah. But since they do have to come in some kind of order, I'm going to put them in the order that I discovered them, to the best of my memory. And that would actually have us starting off with the first webcomic I ever read, which a friend introduced to me 12 years ago. Number 1.
Hey Riff, fixing your robot?
Still needs work. I'm using parts from my dimensional flux agitator.
Are you sure that's safe?
Totally. Torg?
You blasted Torg into another dimension? How will he get back?
At least this time we didn't both get zapped. That means I can track him from here. I can fetch him back in a few hours. Torg will be fine, as long as he didn't get zapped to a dimension of pain or something.
Welcome to the dimension of pain.
Thanks. Can I use your restroom?
Nope.
Sluggy Freelance is created by Pete Abrams. It started in August of 1997 and updates every day.
Sluggy Freelance is one of the oldest webcomics out there. It probably stands true to say that it was a major influence to a lot of other webcomics. It helped set the standard for things that you could do with a webcomic, things you should do with a webcomic, patterns for how to develop the story and characters, how to migrate a comic's focus from being humor alone to also having a dramatic story, and so forth. Now, you might try to argue that there's not much example needed, or at least not that other sources couldn't demonstrate. But you ought to bear in mind that even the whole standard of posting free content on the internet was very new back then. There were no models to follow or learn from. There were no sites dedicated to webcomic distribution. Back then, you could only guess about what kind of audiences were out there. Sluggy Freelance demonstrated even the most fundamental things, like the fact that audiences would be interested in stories that involve things like time travel and robots and demons and alternate dimensions and magic and space travel, let alone the idea that one comic could do all of that and still have time for breakfast. It demonstrated that people would be interested in serious, long-winded stories that only give a minute or two of new content each day. But all of this is more of a history lesson. After all, there are many stories out there that might be of historical importance, but don't give any particularly great entertainment for today's audiences. So what about Sluggy? If you want a testament to its greatness, how about you just take a look at the fact that it is still going strong, even after 14 years. After all that time, after thousands of strips and hundreds of stories, the comic has never had to break down and reinvent itself, nor has it gotten stale or predictable. I'm sure it has evolved itself a bit over the years, but only gently. It may give a lot more attention to long and dramatic stories than even its author thought was possible when it started, but it still has room for the same humor and silliness that got it started.
Number 2.
I can't believe they'd put me on trial for trying to kill a vampire.
Oh, don't worry. We've seen to it that you'll be properly defended. This is Mr. Drool.
Ah! Zombie!
But he's your lawyer.
Ah! Lawyer! Your Honor, the accused is obviously a violent man by nature. Look, he's killed the public defender. He was a lawyer. I mean zombie! I think it's safe to say the defense rests in peace, Your Honor.
Was that really necessary?
Yes, I believe so.
Van Von Hunter is created by Sudomi Studio. It started in February 2002, but is no longer updating, having made over 230 pages before unexpectedly stopping. It looks like the title is pronounced Van Von Hunter, but the 5th page made me think it was Von Hunter. I tend to jump between the two pronunciations, so I hope you can just bear with me on that.
Van Von Hunter takes place in a fantasy world, and specifically in the Land of Decay, a land filled with monsters and ghouls, ruled by demons and vampires. The story follows a mighty warrior who wanders through this land hunting evil stuff.
Von Hunter has released 3 manga-style books. Now, you ought to be aware that these aren't just reprinting what they have on the web like we get with most comics. These are actually completely new adventures for Mr. Hunter. In fact, it actually takes place several years after the webcomic. So, you want to read the webcomic before you read these. I can't be specific about when they take place because, well, the webcomic kind of stopped somewhat abruptly and they never officially wrapped everything up. But the manga does establish that Mr. Hunter defeated the demonic ruler of Decay and restored peace and prosperity to the land. Still, though, read the webcomic first. I read that it actually was also printed in a newspaper for about 6 months. I didn't get that newspaper, and I don't know how I could find a copy of that. I don't know if it's the same thing that was printed somewhere else or if it's something completely new. There was also a movie that they made. I never saw that either, so I can't comment on it. But, looking at the ads, it doesn't really look like it was about the same monster hunting that we have in the comic. It's more about...
I am Van Von Hunter. Are you in need of assistance? Do not fear. I will save you.
What have I done to these people to make them hate me so?
I guess talking to people who love anime I don't know. You can watch the trailer yourself. It might suit your fancy. I was just disappointed because it wasn't, well...
I've got the answer to your question. Which question was that? What to do to Von Hunter once he gets here? Behold! This doesn't seem terribly appropriate. Exactly. So when he least suspects it... Ooh, nicely done, sire. Yes, little would he suspect that his tea is laced with poison. What if Von Hunter doesn't want to drink any tea? Well, that seems awfully unlikely. I mean, who doesn't like tea? Well, just for the sake of argument. Oh, very well. Show him! Ah, yes, now that's more like it. Where did you get this guy? I don't know, but he sure keeps things piping hot.
Well, I suppose in the end it would have been a very expensive movie to produce, and really I should just be pleased or even honored that they decided to use Van Von Hunter for the host of this documentary about anime culture. Van Von Hunter is amazingly hilarious. It's also well drawn. The humor in here is incredible. The manga is right up there with it, and it's simply full of legendary humor. What more is there really to say? I had never laughed out loud this much at a comic before, and only rarely ever since. What better compliment is there to pay? Number 3. But what was it that Beaver said about setting up spatial anomalies in my bedroom?
Steve, under no circumstances are you allowed to set up a spatial anomaly in your bedroom. Now get a dustpan and clear up all this dark matter.
I don't remember exactly, but I think he was sort of against it. I guess I better not.
But Steve, physics is fun!
I know that, imaginary floating disembodied head of Albert Einstein. But you know what Beaver said.
That's a good point. But what if I had a dinosaur body? I'll do it!
Beaver and Steve is created by James Turner. It started in September 2004 and made nearly 350 comics before being put into an indefinite hiatus. This is a very funny comic. This is just plain a silly, outrageous, crazy, strange, weird stuff. Abnormal, crazy. I mean, anything goes in this comic. You know, it could be the zombie unicorn apocalypse, or it could be going to the moon, or it could be, you know, some creature in their kitchen that's eating their ice cream. You could see somebody grab an object, and it'll make a sound effect that says, grab. Come on! There just does not seem to be any guiding set of rules or cohesiveness. If it's funny, it happens. They don't try to keep in any sort of bounds of, this is what's possible, this is what's not possible. He just ignores all that. He just goes, this is what's funny. And this is also what's funny. I mean, if you're looking for something that makes you laugh, why waste your time with storylines and plot and character development? Why not just take the silly dial and crank it? And you know, a lot of comics like to, after a while, when things start getting stale, they start shifting towards that. You know, they've established their characters. Well, let's take them through an adventure and establish plot. No, not here. Not with Beaver and Steve.
Beaver and Steve is strictly comedy, it is strictly silly, it is strictly unique. How could you possibly turn down a comic that handles itself like that?
You know, as I look over this list of my top 10 favorite webcomics, I can't help but notice that every name on this list is a comic that established itself with humor. Even Sluggy Freelance, which I read far more for the story now than the humor these days, it's still a comic that established itself on humor. Now, I didn't intend for the list to come out this way. I wasn't excluding comics that focus on having an actual story. But as the list shows, I value humor. And the comics that can make me laugh made the cut a lot easier than the ones that didn't. So I think it really says something about this next entry to say that it made this list without relying on humor. And what's more, this comic didn't even need to fight its way onto this list. The story is just that good.
Number 4.
Slightly Damned is created by Chew. It started in March 2004 and updates once per week. No, wait, scratch that. She just announced that it's now updating twice a week. Aw, hell yeah! The comic takes place in a fantasy world, and a very original world at that. Instead of the common assortment of fantasy creatures, it has its own races. And they're pretty unique, too. Now, after that introduction, I think I should be fair and state that the comic does spice things up with a joke on occasion.
In fact, many of the beginning pages suggest that the comic is aimed at being a humor-driven comic. Even today, a fair portion of the pages try to end with a lighthearted moment. But, to me at least, this has always seemed more like providing some comic relief. Stuff that makes you smile and brings amusement, but doesn't really go far enough to sell the comic just on jokes. What really keeps the comic going is its story. So what is that story about?
Well, it starts off with this girl named Rhea. No, she's not a human, she's a Jakai. Now, I'd like to pay homage to Excel Saga and Yu Yu Hakusho and claim that she dies at the start of the story. But that wouldn't be true. At the start of the story, she's already dead.
She meets with Death, who sends her to her eternal fate. Now, she's not good enough to make it into heaven, but it turns out that she's also not quite evil enough for hell. So, she's sent to the outer circle of hell, a place known as the Circle of the Slightly Damned, hence the name of the comic. She has a demon assigned to watch over her, and this demon is, well, the special ed type.
Now, I don't want to spoil everything that happens, so I'm going to have to leave you there. I know I haven't exactly given you a lot to go on, but trust me, this story gets really good. If you read it and you don't quite agree with me, at least read through the first 100 pages, because the story starts to turn about there. I mean, we don't even have one of the primary characters in that first part of the story. Look, I don't want to say anything, but that girl there, she's going to change things.
Number 5. There's about a baker's dozen worth of zombies outside the office, and I'm sure there's more farther out.
Oh.
Aren't you lucky to live in the only town in the world prepared for a zombie invasion?
That's awesome. Seriously? There's like a zombie defense system?
Yeah, it's us.
The Adventures of Dr. McNinja is created by Chris Hastings. It started officially in June 2005 and updates 3 times a week. Yeah, you heard right. Dr. McNinja. He's a doctor and a ninja. And it really is just as crazy and amazing as that sounds. Now, I told you that it was really hard to narrow down my list to just 10 of the best comics, but that doesn't mean that there weren't some comics that were very clearly going to make the cut. The Adventures of Dr. McNinja was probably the easiest choice to make. I said that Van Von Hunter was at one time the best webcomic I read. Now, that title would probably go to Dr. McNinja. Look, let's just look at the facts. 1, the comic is really well drawn. 2, the comic is frickin' hilarious. 3, it has some really cool stories. So, point 1, really well drawn. Just look for yourself. What do I have to say? I'm not bashing any comic that chooses to use a less naturalistic style, but you gotta give credit where credit is due. Drawing something to look this naturalistic is hard, and Chris Hastings has the skill that it takes. Point 2, frickin' hilarious. Look, there's silly, there's amusing, there's even funny, and then there's the stuff that actually makes you laugh out loud. This comic makes me laugh out loud.
Now, I don't know if I can say that no other comic has made me laugh out loud this much, but there's very little competition once you reach this level. And this comic stands head and shoulders above all but a select few.
It makes me laugh as much as I did with Van Von Hunter, and gives me more cherished memories that I can share with others. Point 3, cool stories.
Most of our beloved comics give us good stories to enjoy between the laughs. We even can get really powerful and invoking stories too. But Dr. McNinja never really goes for a powerful drama, but rather gives us cool adventures. So when the comic isn't being funny, it still is giving us an awesome adventure to read.
What am I talking about? I'm talking about watching the Doctor ride a robot Dracula through space. I'm talking about an alternate future where there's intelligent dinosaurs that have taken over the world. Still not cool enough for you? How about you watch the Doctor take on an army of evil clones of himself, being led by a man who can shoot lasers from his eye? So yeah, this is probably the greatest webcomic being made right now.
Okay, even if you don't know me in person and are not one of the 2 people who have visited my website, you can still tell by the videos I've posted before, and the videos I've favorited, and the channels I subscribe to, that I have a great love for all things video game. So if there's any surprise to the fact that I would list a webcomic about video games as one of my top 10, it should only be for the fact that it took me so dang long to get to it.
There are, in fact, a lot of webcomics about video games, and a fair number of them are really popular for good reason. Yet, I am selecting only one to be featured on this list. Now, the comics most people might be thinking I'm going to list have good cause to be listed as great, but even though I've collected some strips that I'm highly likely to share with others, I actually don't read most of them because they just plain get offensive. I'm sorry, but those obsessions with male genitalia and homosexual activity are only funny to people who secretly hold desires for that kind of thing. So, the comic I will list is Brawl in the Family. Wait, Brawl in the Family? Seriously? I mean, the concept is so very far from original, the artwork is often poor, and quite frankly, I actually like Awkward Zombie more. So why list Brawl in the Family? Well, it's like this. A while back, I decided to let comic authors know when I laugh, because they have no way to know otherwise. So when I read a comic and wind up actually laughing or chuckling, I send the author an email or post a comment on the page to let them know this. And as I think about it, I've probably sent more of these messages to the staff at Brawl in the Family than any other comic. Only Dr. McNinja can challenge that claim, but I think Brawl in the Family still pulls ahead. And in the end, when you are reading a funny webcomic about video games, what more substantial measure could you possibly use than how often it makes you laugh? So that's why I decided to list Brawl in the Family.
Number 6.
Thank you,
Hey, princess, give me a wet one.
You're not Mario.
What, are you kidding me? Of course I am, Hot Buns. Mamma mia, it's a me, and whatever.
You don't look like Mario.
Darn right, I look great. Much better than the doughy, noodle-armed loser I used to be. Now how about a kiss for your hero? Luigi, what happened?
Brawl in the Family is created by Matthew Toronto. It started in May of 2008 and currently updates twice a week.
As you should have figured out already, the comic is all about humor.
The premise is that the comic follows Smash Bros. Brawl, and by extension, any Nintendo game. Occasionally it may do a comic about a character that isn't from Smash Bros., but it has never done one that isn't about a particular video game. Unlike most video game comics, Brawl in the Family has no original characters, so it never takes a break from games to do bits about gaming culture, or rather, what the author views to be gaming culture, nor does it take a break to try to focus on character development, which really I can't see anyone caring about for a comic of this type.
It also has a primary focus on Kirby. In fact, most of the beginning strips are about the humorous results of Kirby eating various things. My personal favorite of which would have to be the one where he eats EA.
If you know anything about how EA operates, you'll get why. And this brings me to my last point. Even though the comic seems so bright and cartoony, and focuses on child-friendly games, you'll see a good measure of intelligent observations from time to time that show that this guy really cares about video games and knows what's going on.
Yeah, it's a cutesy E-rated webcomic, but this guy knows what he's talking about.
Number 7.
I said talk, so you better start talking if you know what's good for you.
Okay, you win. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Forg.
Forg who?
What do you mean, Forg who? You talk to him like that, he'll cut your freaking head off, man!
Kid, you're so funny.
Yeah,
but at least I'm not funny looking like you.
Cwen's Quest is created by Sarah Nelson and Nick Strofolino. It started in November 2007 and updates once per week. So how much of a comic should be humor and how much should be action? Well, in the end, this is going to come down to how good the humor is and how good the action is. Thankfully for Cwen's Quest, they've done a good job on both. The comic makes itself out to be one focused on humor. It's a funny comic with a great sense of humor that I can't get enough of. But where most comics, when they don't have something funny to say, they tend to shift to dramatic stories, well, Cwen's Quest shifts more towards action scenes and fight scenes. And this is some good action, too. You can see what's going on, the events get proper pacing with the size in their panels, and perhaps best of all, these characters kick some serious A. But the action doesn't really sell this comic, not to the point where I'd put it in my top 10. That's just the spice. The real meat of the comic is the humor. Cwen's Quest is set in a fantasy world with its own flavor of magic and creatures. It gives the perfect setting for humorous events that we can't see coming. Much of the humor in this comic comes out of complete surprise. And if you want to be scientific about this, surprise is probably the most important quality of humor. But maybe I'm overanalyzing this. Well, regardless of how you want to call it, though, Cwen's Quest is remarkably funny. It's rife with jokes you just couldn't have anywhere else. This makes the comic more unique and more enjoyable.
The final aspect I want to touch up on is the story. Right from the beginning, the story jumps around in time to show you the parts of the story that are important instead of just what happens in order. Not only is this letting the story reveal itself in a more interesting fashion, but it also proves how well thought out the story is. I really can't say anything without spoiling it, but let's just say that there are a lot of times when you're going to go back and reread some of the older comics because they will suddenly have new meaning and understanding. Going along with the story is the presentation. As I've already alluded to, the story as a whole is given to us in a perfect sequence for getting the most out of the story. But more than just that, each individual page is well presented. From clear to interesting angles to interesting layouts for the panels. This is just a very professional and very well-made comic. Everything is so well done and thought out and interesting that even without the humor, this comic would probably still be standing among my most favorite webcomics. Number 8.
You didn't think you'd get away that easy, did you?
This guy can fight, but he's outnumbered, don't worry.
Think again. There's 3 of us. Angry Raccoon, I choose you!
Alec?
Sorry, I'm still a bit dizzy.
Tadashi?
Culture Shock is created by Reed Hawker. It started in November 2001 and updates once per week. Culture Shock is about a knight who is sent 700 years into the future, into our time, searching for a witch that terrorizes people in his era. Here he meets a ninja who came here from Japan so that he could date American women. There's also an elf girl who traveled from the knight's time, a young hacker who is far too rich for his own good, a lady cop who's trying to keep the peace in the city, and a cowgirl who is totally awesome but just doesn't show up enough in the comic.
So, you see, the comic is ripe to play on the culture shock from all these people, from all these different walks of life. but it doesn't really follow through with that except on occasion. The humor shifted to other avenues over time. And I do mean over time. Especially at its beginning, the author took some long hiatuses. When he came back, the artwork got better and the direction a little more cohesive. It had gained 10 years of improvement, but without actually having 10 years of comics. The comic isn't about culture shock anymore, even if it bears that title. I'm not sure what it is, though, that makes this comic so darn funny. I think it's because he has that perfect level of silly. It's not so crazy that it's unfounded and you can't laugh at people's reactions, but it is crazy enough that it can do the occasional crazy thing. I don't know how you could repeat this guy's formula, but it works. And did I mention the mental guy who thinks everything is a video game?
This next comic is all about Half-Life 2, with a little bit of Half-Life 1 and Counter-Strike. You won't get much of the humor if you haven't played Half-Life 2.
Now, that does not mean that you should not read this comic if you haven't played Half-Life 2. That means if you haven't played Half-Life 2, you should play Half-Life 2, because it's one of the greatest first-person shooters of all time.
Now, most comics centered around a video game, in this case Half-Life, would have their comic be about this guy. But this next comic is all about this guy.
Sometimes I dream about cheese.
You remember listening to Dr. Breen read a letter from a concerned citizen?
Seen fit to suppress our reproductive cycle. Sincerely, a concerned citizen. Thank you for writing, Concerned.
Well, that's what this comic is about. It's the half-life and death of Gordon Frohman, a concerned citizen. Number 9.
There's been some rebel activity in this sector, so I want you to report anything unusual, no matter how minor it might be.
Hi, fellow Combine soldiers. I'm Gordon Frohman. I'm Gordon Combine Soldier Frohman. Hey, did you find the dead naked soldier up the road? If so, I don't know anything about it, and the tire track across his groin isn't from my bike. Plus, he was already dead when I ran over him. At any rate, I am definitely not a rebel in a Combine uniform, if that's what you're accusing me of. Ah! A rebel detecting roller mine! Leave my bike alone! It was a gift from the rebels! Aha! I bet you'll think twice next time you attack a rebel who's got a shovel.
So, anything unusual? No matter how minor? And what if it's totally major? Then report it to Gordon Combine Soldier Frohman. He seems to know a lot about the rebels.
It's got a friend!
Concerned is created by Christopher C. Livingston. It started in May of 2005 and ran its course, finishing the comic with a proper ending after more than 200 strips.
The comic is really just about some ridiculously funny humor as a guy who has the intelligence of a shoebox bumbles through City 17, following basically the same path that Gordon Freeman takes a few weeks later. Earlier, I said that Brawl in the Family was the only comic about video games on this list.
Yet, I am selecting only one.
I stand by that statement. Concerned is only about one video game, and thus it is a parody comic, not a comic about video gaming. And I feel that I must emphasize that fact. This is a parody comic. While there are plenty of jokes that you will laugh at without being familiar with this one game, to really get the full breadth of what this comic has to offer, you just need to play the game.
You can pick up a copy of the Orange Box for $20, and it comes with that and Portal. And that Team Fortress 2 game that everybody seems to think you can just show any footage of it and it's funny. Whatever.
Most parodies just mock and emulate the original work, but because Concern takes place before the game, it actually gives a rare glimpse behind the scenes, showing how things got to the point they are at when the game started.
For example, why are there exploding barrels laying around everywhere? Concern tells you the answer. Did people used to go to Ravenholm? Concern tells you the answer.
This makes Concern far more interesting to read than most parodies. It becomes more than just a parody, it almost becomes its own story. Altogether, this makes Concerned a bit more enticing than just being a simple parody comic, because it's giving us a little more than we expect from a parody. Number 10. Grrl Power is created by David Barrick. It started in August of 2010 and updates once per week.
I actually found Grrl Power earlier this year, but it fully deserves its standing among my top 10. So the premise is pretty simple. Superheroes. A world full of people with superpowers, and the comic focuses on a military auxiliary formed of people with extraordinary powers. That statement alone doesn't really establish this comic above others. I mean, I could describe Spinneret in the same way, and Grrl Power doesn't have a spider-powered six-armed lady.
Ooh. So, what gives Grrl Power its edge? What makes me love this comic that much when it hasn't even had 100 pages? Why is it already so great when...
Holy ferret balls! We haven't even seen the main character's superpowers yet! Well, there's only one quality that can make me love a comic this much. It's brilliantly hilarious.
It goes back to what I said about Culture Shock. It's the perfect mix of silly. On top of that, it just flows right. So it's fun to read. It's fun to go back and read again.
David Barrick seems to really know how to do the writing right. I said that we haven't even seen the main character's superpowers yet, and that is not a joke nor an exaggeration. Now, he's not intentionally dragging this out to tease the readers. He just has good, fun, and humorous stuff that he wants to give us first.
So, instead of rushing out to meet some dictated criteria, saying, you have to introduce this element by this point. No. He's using the unique capability of a webcomic to give the story the pace that the story needs.
He knows what he's doing. Or, at the very least, he's naturally gifted at it. Good work, Mr. Barrick. You made it to my top 10. Well, there we go. My favorite webcomics that I barely managed to whittle down to just 10. And like I said, there was another 15 that I really wanted to put on that list. Well, maybe later I'll have to make a video to honor them, or I really want to make a video where I focus on the ones that focused on story, because I really like them too.
Anyways, if you think I missed a really great comic, feel free to mention it. You could post a comment like any random fool, but I'm going to challenge you to post a video, just like Hadrix did, just like I did. I'd like to see what you think makes a great comic.
Why don't I just throw in a final juxtaposition here between my 10 favorite and Hadrix's top 10 favorite. Obviously, you can see that we both highly recommend Sluggy Freelance and Dr. McNinja, so you might want to check them out if you haven't already. And looking at his list, I just want to also take the time to point out Bob and George, The Book of Biff, and Order of the Stick. I'll also say that those are really great comics and very much worth your time reading them. I also just started reading Darths and Droids, and that comic is hilarious.
Anyway, thank you for watching, and read these comics because they're really good.